Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on which country you are joining from. As Director of the South and Southeast Asia Multidisciplinary Applied Research Network for Transforming Societies of Global South, in short, SMART Center at the Asian Institute of Technology, and coordinating lead author of Chapter 5 of Working Group 3 of IPCC 6th Assessment Report, I welcome you to the webinar on IPCC TG Data 6th Assessment Report Scenarios Database for Asia. I'm sure those who have joined in today's webinar are aware that Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is the event body for assessing the science related to climate change. IPCC assessments provide governments at all levels with scientific information that they can use to develop climate policies. IPCC assessments are a key input into the international negotiations to tackle climate change. IPCC assesses thousands of scientific papers published each year by a wide variety of scientists from all over the world to tell policymakers what scientific communities know and do not know about the risks related to climate change. There is a very large evidence base and data are used for producing these assessments. TG data stands for Task Group on Data Support for Climate Change Assessment. Let me run through the agenda for today. After me, you will hear from Working Group 3 co-chair Professor James Key. I will present then highlights from IPCC reports about global, national, and regional scenarios, and also some bottom-up scenarios used to assess mitigation potential. Shreya Som, from a postdoctoral researcher at SMART Center at AIT and also a member with the technical support unit of Working Group 3 of IPCC, will demonstrate where to get the bottom-up assessment data. After her, you will hear from David, Sebastian, Adam, and Ala, the introduction to TG data, FAIR principles and general guidelines, and about data distribution center overview. Ed Byers from IASA will provide an introduction and hands-on demonstration to Scenario Explorer. Let me tell you that this webinar is the 5th regional event. IPCC authors from various regions are organizing these webinars for their regional scientific and user community. I hand over now to Professor James Key, co-chair of IPCC Working Group 3 6th Assessment Cycle, to start off this webinar. And I request Ed to play the video message from James Key.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. As one of the Working Group 3 co-chairs for IPCC, I'm very flattered to be invited to say a few words to start off this event. And I'd like in particular to thank my colleague Ala Al-Kurdaji from Working Group 3 and colleagues at TG Data who put this session together. The reason that we have this type of database is that there's a memorandum of understanding between the Integrated Assessment Modelling Consortium, IASA, and the 2 Working Group 3 co-chairs, Priyadarshi Shukla and myself. And one of the reasons that we co-chairs were really keen to have a database like this is because of the important role that scenarios have played in all IPCC Working Group 3 reports. I'm going to talk specifically about the role of the global integrated assessment models, which of course face 2 directions. They face in one direction towards Working Group 1 world and the emission pathways, but they also point towards the sectoral chapters in IPCC Working Group 3 reports in terms of mitigation pathways and changes in underlying systems. Now, one thing to flag about the IPCC cycle that's just concluding is the exemplary collaboration that's taken place between people in the Working Group 1 and Working Group 3 communities, particularly in relation to the use of climate emulators or reduced complexity climate models that turn emission pathways into estimated climate outcomes. This database is really important so that we have transparency concerning scenarios. It gives credibility to the scenario process. And I particularly welcome TG data participation and the adoption of the FAIR principles, which no doubt we'll all hear more about. I'd like to note that curated scenarios databases have been around since the IPCC 5th assessment cycle. There was an AR5 database, there was a database for the 1.5 report, and now a database for the 6th assessment report, as well as various specific databases for individual model intercomparison projects. And EASA has been doing an excellent job in curating all of these. Now, I just wanted to remind everyone that there are in fact no IPCC scenarios. Back about 2005 or so, IPCC decided that it wouldn't own its own scenarios, but that it would help to facilitate the process by which scenarios were developed by the community. So this database is very much a community effort. It provides a basis for the subsequent creative reanalysis of published scenarios and secondary research that takes place outside IPCC assessments. And we as co-chairs can only encourage this because it leads to new research which can be covered in AR7 and subsequent assessment. Now, there have been many calls for transparency in relation to scenarios, and the development of the AR6 database has very much responded to these calls. This time, there's much more information on input assumptions and a formalized and published approach to vetting the scenarios within the database. The database also provides the basis for constructive critiques of how the scenarios have been developed. That may occasionally be painful, but this constructive critique is important because it can enhance future scenario and model development. Now, I'm just going to finish off here, but just to emphasize that IPCC does think that scenarios are incredibly important. That's the reason that governments have agreed that there will be a workshop on scenarios to be held in Bangkok at the end of this month. This will review the role of scenarios in the 6th assessment cycle and make recommendations for the development and use of scenarios in subsequent cycles. So I'm going to finish off there, but I'd like to end just by thanking everyone involved in putting this event together and my best wishes for a successful workshop.
Thank you very much, Jim. And what I would do now is, let me just say one or two housekeeping rule, because there are a large number of participants. So we are expecting any question in the Q&A box, not in the chat, or we will not be able to follow the hand raise option. So please type your questions in the Q&A box. So we will have the question answer sessions. Now I'll make a presentation on the use of the scenarios in the 6th assessment report. And after that, Shreya will present the data access issue on certain parts. And after that, you will get some question answer time. And after that, the agenda will follow. So let me share my screen. And what we are going to present is that I'm the coordinating lead author of the chapter 5, as I said. However, what I want to share with you is that we need to understand that the IPCC assessment is based on huge review of huge scientific literature. And so what the scientific community, individual researchers or team of researchers produces globally from different countries become the major evidence base for IPCC assessment. And based on those assessments, IPCC produces key messages which are helpful for the policymakers and the decision makers, and also produces various key figures which can communicate the messages better. But all these, as I said, repeatedly, I'll be mentioning these because that's why this webinar has been organized, that there is a huge database, and so everybody can access that database, which will be demonstrated today. And just to give you a background, the use of scenarios is an integral part of IPCC assessment and reports, as I said. So the scenarios and warming levels structure the understanding across the cause and effect change from emission to climate change and risks. In 6th assessment report, integrated assessment framework on future climate impacts and mitigation follow this circular path, which says that socioeconomic changes influences emission, that changes climate, and which drives impact and risks. But also these risks shape or influence socioeconomic changes, and socioeconomic changes also shapes and influences the impacts and the risks. And so here lies the mitigation policy options, and here lies the scope of adaptation policy options. So you will see that in working group 1, 2, and 3, the scenario is, again, as I said, is an integral part of the IPCC assessment reports. The shared socioeconomic pathways are used widely in the for understanding the relation between the different socioeconomic futures which can be imagined, which includes the different economic parameter growth and also the ease of mitigation or adaptation actions. And depending on ease of mitigation and adaptation options and the socioeconomic context, the different pathways SSP1 to SSP5 are have been created as the shared socioeconomic paths, and they can relate to different emission levels. And these emission levels relate to different temperature levels. And with that, one can see that there are different pathways, mitigation pathways, characterization has been done in working group 3, and also in working group 2, the risks are presented depending on different level of temperature, and these are very much known within the IPCC terminology as burning embers. Higher the risk, the darker the shade. So if we look into the use of scenarios, again, as I said, working group 1, 2, and 3 all uses the different scenarios. In working group 3, these characterization of the category of pathways actually show the different warming levels with different levels of probability, and which shows that what is the probability of 50% chances? What are the chances that 1.5 degree warming with or without overshoot can be reached? So these are the different characterizations which have been used, and also risks, determinants of risks in working group 2 are represented. So in chapter 3 in working group 3, assesses the emission pathways, and it assesses the pathways literature, both looking into the commonalities and differences in the various literature to understand how societal choices may steer the system into a particular direction. More than 2,000 quantitative emission pathways were submitted to the IPCC 6th assessment report. and in the AR6 Scenarios Database, out of which 1,202 scenarios were included for provide sufficient information for assessing the associated warming consistent with Working Group 1. More details, if you want to know how they were chosen, why others were excluded, I would urge you to look into the Chapter 3 of 6 assessment report of Working Group 3, which are easily downloadable through Google search also. And what Chapter 3 has done is that they have defined 2 reference scenarios, which is depending on what are the current policies and pledges made till 2020, and what pathways to the emission level they can lead to. And then there are moderate action pathway, which are mostly the NDCs, and if some moderate additional actions are taken in future, then that's another pathway. There are other 5 illustrative mitigation pathways, which looks into various transformations which might be consistent with different target temperature levels. And they are like heavy reliance on renewables, strong emphasis on energy demand reductions, and extensive use of carbon dioxide removal in the energy and the industry sector, which is known as IMP negative. And then the mitigation in the context of broader sustainable development, that can be another future option, and which is IMP sustainable pathways. And then implication of a less rapid and gradual strengthening of near-term mitigation actions, which is IMPGS. So under such scenarios, what are the interesting results which are communicated? There are many, many results. I just picked up one to give an example. Say these are the 7 pathways that we have said, illustrative pathways. Some are mitigation pathways and some are reference case scenarios. And so with those, what it has shown that how the primary energy or how the energy system would look like over time under different scenarios is explained here. So you can see that somewhere there is going to be even more fossil fuel if we follow the current policy scenario till 2100. But if we are going to low demand scenarios or the sustainable pathway scenarios, we can see that the fossil fuels are going to be almost zero by the turn of the mid-century. So these are the different ways how it shows what kind of transformation are imagined in these illustrative pathways. And with these, what it shows is that what are the different temperature levels or emission levels it will end up with, because as we have seen, there is going to be energy use ratio primary energy use ratio is going to be very different in all of these. We can see that how they end up with different emission levels of greenhouse gases and only CO2 level by 2100. So Chapter 3 also shows that how the sectoral emission level will look like in all these scenarios. And this is a 2019 scenario. And this shows that how at the time of net zero CO2, how these combination of emissions from different sectors would look like. It also says these have a very important policy implication, because it also says that along these different routes of which the society makes a choice for, will determine what will be the level of ambition. Because if globally the decision is towards more renewable, more proportion of renewables in the energy systems, or low demand scenario, or the sustainable development paths, the ambition levels need not go very high because we are already on a low emission pathway. So sooner these are taken, then what will be the level of ambitions? It shows those kind of messages. So regional combination also in different categories are also shown how the emissions will be from different regions. From Asia Pacific region is a yellow one, and we can see that this is something which is of interest to Asia Pacific region. And also there are some other regional information which are also given. Earlier what I showed were all global level, and these are regional level disaggregation are reported. Also some regional level information are given in terms of investment need and investment gap, how they are, say, by sector, how the investment gaps are, and by region, how investment gaps are. And if you go a little more, and then you can see that how for different regions, it is only for developed and developing countries. So you can see that there is more investment need in the developing countries, and there is also more gap in the developing countries. And if you look into the Southeast Asia and Pacific region, there also you can see that what is the mitigation investment flow, they are very low here, and then how much more is needed. So this is something, some regional information are also given, but also under different scenario, right? So, but also, as I said already, that in 6th assessment report, there had been many more additional things which have been done. This shows in chapter 4 that the development pathways are the major drivers of greenhouse gas emissions. So how can we focus more on mitigation and shifting on development pathways to increase sustainability, and based on literature, particularly at the national scale? Although this figure is shown at the global scale, that trend in the implemented policies would lead us to the higher emission level, but for limiting 2 degrees and for the NDCs, what we can show that we can see that there is still huge gap, and what we are looking for is limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. This is the blue part. So what are the gaps we can see from here? But all these are based on a number of national databases which have been collected. And I'm just showing few regions here, but it has been done for many other regions in the chapter 4. You can look into the chapter 4 to see what are these databases which have been used and how these can be enriched also. But also remember that these are all coming from different sources and different studies which have already been done at the national scale. And IPCC makes an assessment based on all these national studies. So also in IPCC 5th assessment report, as I said, there have been different scenarios and pathways which have been imagined, that is the low demand scenario, sustainable development scenario, more renewable scenario. So I'm just focusing on the low demand scenario because this low demand scenario has actually led to a very new chapter in this cycle, where we tried to dig into more case studies, 500 bottom-up case studies from all global regions, to find out that how in the different sectors, whether it is in the nutrition sector, the manufacturing product producing sector, or mobility sector, or shelter or buildings, what might be the actions taken to reduce emission, which shows that if we focus only on the supply side, we might have to do more decarbonization and more burden on the supply side. But if we can take action in the demand side. That means if we can make more energy efficient choices, if we can reduce food waste, if we can make circular economy practices. So there are, if we shift to public transport system, comfortable public transport system, more compact city designs, then we can show that these colored ones are showing that how from the supply side decarbonization burden can be reduced, and the burden on the, so these colored ones are showing what can be done in the demand side, and also what will be the remaining emission which needs to be taken care of on the supply side. So these bottom-up studies and this whole database showed that on the demand side, actually 40 to 70% of the projected emission in 2050 from 2 scenarios can actually be reduced by the demand side interventions. So what might be the different futures and transformative changes which can be imagined have been made and have been assessed in this assessment report using case studies, using national scale data, using regional scale data, and using global scale data, using bottom-up models and also the integrated assessment models. So there has been a huge database and which are maintained in IPCC, which will be shared. So Shreya will show you how these database of the demand side can be accessed and from where. I will stop here and I'll leave it to Shreya now. And after that, we will take 5 to 10 minutes question answer session, or if you have already put it in the question answer box, that will be most welcome. Thank you very much. Shreya?
Hi, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Shreya Shah, postdoctoral researcher at AIT and also associated with Working Group 3 of Working Group 3 TSU. So I will demonstrate how to download IPCC Working Group 3 figures and from where. So for that, first you have to go to the IPCC AR6 data catalog landing page, which looks like this. So I will be taking you there in a minute. And then from there, you have to go to Working Group 3 AR6 data. So let me stop share this screen and share another screen. Just give me a second. Yeah, so this is the AR6 data catalog. Now, if you scroll down to this, scroll down the page, you will see this Working Group 3 AR6 data, where you will get a brief explanation of what data we have and then who are hosting these data sets. So here is a link of final data sets for figures and tables. If you click here, it will take you to the dataset portal. So I will be showing you, here we have 39 datasets of all the summary for policymaker figures of Working Group 3, along with technical summary figures. So I will show you the chapter 5 figure that Professor Roy just showed you. I will show you how you can access the data of that figure. So that figure is figure SPM6, the demand side figure. So if you type SPM6, you will get to see this portal where you will find the documentation and summary of the dataset. You will also find the DOI of the dataset. you will find a brief description which includes the figure caption, and also it provides a reference to the supplementary material that has the 500 studies reference list from where the case studies were picked up. Then here you will find the other sources from where the data has been picked up. So they have the whole lot of references here. It also includes the AR6 Scenario Database that Kate will be talking about in the next session. Then it also has the citation, how you can cite, if you take the data, how you can cite the data set. And finally, if you go here, you will see the data downloads. So you can download your data. This SPM6 data is an Excel file. You can download this. So I will show you how this looks like. And also you can find the structural metadata set here. Sorry for sharing my screen 3 times. Okay, so this is how the Excel file looks like. It has the data, it has the emissions data, it has the mitigation potential data, and for each of the socio-cultural, infrastructural, and technological potential, you will find the ranges here and the median here. And then you have the, for the panel C that Professor Roy showed, you have the electricity data here as well. So that's all from my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya. If there is any question, you can post it in the Q&A and we will try to answer those. Some have already been answered. So I don't see any open questions anymore. Okay. If there are no more questions, then we will yeah, I just want to say that for downloading the figures, if you go to the IPCC 6 assessment report downloadable link, there you get all the figures which you can download. Okay, if we don't have any, I think the questions that are coming, we can answer in the Q&A box, and that will reach to the those who are asking the questions. So what we do is we move on, and I would request now to play the video message or the pre-recorded video by David, Adam, Sebastian, and Ala on introduction to TG data. But before that, I know Ala is going to say a few words before this video is played. Yes, Ala, over to you.
Thank you, Jayashree, and hello everyone. My name is Ala Kurdaji. I'm a research fellow at Imperial College and one of the members of the science team and the technical support unit for Working Group 3. We have a video that explains the process around TG data. So this video will include the recording from David Howard, who is one of the co-chairs for the TG data group in the 6th assessment cycle of the IPCC. We also have a recording from our colleagues, Adam Minwad, who is the CEO of MetadataWorks. And MetadataWorks is the data service provider who are hosting the figures data, as Shreya demonstrated to you just now. And then you will hear it from my recorded self about how we adopted the FAIR data principles in Working Group 3 on the SPM figures, so that's summary for policymaker figures, as well as the technical summary figures. So the FAIR principles is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Essentially, any data used in any of those figures will be fully accessible, and you will also be able to understand how this data has been developed and how we reach these numbers, so that you can replicate the process either for the same figure, or you can extend the process to different data sets. So over to you, Ed, I think, to show the video, if you will, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is WR. I co-chair with Sebastian Vicuña the IPCC task group on data support for climate change assessments, TG data. And our objective is to improve access to IPCC data, both for IPCC authors and also for scientists who rely on the IPCC reports. So this presentation is just meant to give you an overview of the efforts that we made in AR6 to make IPCC data more accessible and reusable. And the work relies heavily on the IPCC data distribution centers, so the DDC, and the technical support units from all three working groups. So I'll just be introducing TG data briefly, and then Adam will present the DDC and its data curation activities, followed by Ala, with the role played by the working group 3 TSU. So the task group on data support for climate change assessments was created in 2019, and it takes over from the previous task group on data and scenario support for impact and climate analysis. So this previous group was created in 1997 to provide regional climate change information, and it published various guidelines on socioeconomic scenarios, greenhouse gas scenarios, sea level scenarios, and also statistical downscaling. Now, TG data is focused less on creating these types of guidance material and more on data access and reusability. And so our mandate is really about putting data out there. So our objective is to make sure that the IPCC data follows the FAIR principles, meaning data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and usable, reusable. This applies both to the data assessed by authors as to the data created by authors to prepare graphics and tables within the report. And so to achieve this, we've been working with the DDC, a network of institutions that generously contribute their expertise in data creation to the IPCC. And one of the reasons why we want to do this is that there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the report and its review. Just to give you an example, in AR6, over 180,000 comments were collected for the first and second drafts of the three working groups. And each and every one of these comments was given a response. So really the data that analyze all of this deserves to be highlighted and made available so it can be used as a starting point for further research and analysis. So our main objective for the sixth cycle is to publish and archive the data underlying figures and tables found in the summary for policymakers and the technical summaries for all three working groups, as well as the synthesis report. And so the DDC is also working to preserve a snapshot of the core CMIP6 and Cordex data used by IPCC authors in the assessment, this emission scenario database, as well as other key biophysical and socioeconomic data sets that are assessed. And so archiving and publishing those data sets requires an enormous amount of work and coordination distributed among AR6 authors themselves, the technical support staff, and the data distribution centers. And so now I'll let Adam present the DDC and its data curation activities. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ala Kurdaji, and I'm Senior Scientist at Working Group 3 Technical Support Unit. Today, I'll be describing to you the role of the TSU in supporting the TG data process and the use of data in our underlying report. The TSU is overseen by the Working Group Bureau and works closely with the TG data group in order to ensure the implementation of the FAIR data principles. As you well know, in addition to undertaking the assessment, our authors also produced data and figures to support the assessment. And to give you an idea, in Working Group 3 AR6 report, we have around 320 figures. The role of the technical support unit is to provide guidance and training to the authors, as well as figure and data management. And we are also in the process of produce a GitHub repository that include the underlying data of our SPM and technical summary figures and some of their input data. We also work closely with our colleagues at the Data Distribution Center who set up a Zenodo AR6 community, and we provided them with the underlying data for some of our SPM and TS figure as well as their input data. We work closely with the Secretariat in order to ensure that all queries related to figure use are addressed. We work with the data distribution centers in order to ensure the quality control of the implementation of the FAIR data principle in our report. Just a reminder to everyone that the IPCC does not produce its own data, but rather reproduce data available in figures or post-processed data from existing data sets available in the underlying literature. One of the major data products for the Working Group 3 AR6 report is the AR6 Scenario Explorer and database, which is hosted at the International Institute for Applied System Analysis in Austria. So the FAIR data principles are there to ensure that the assessed data code or analyses used to produce figures and tables in our report are properly documented and curated to allow traceability and stability, as well as transparency of the assessment. These principles also support the implementation of the IPCC error protocol, which is used should an error be found at a later stage. As for the implementation of these principles in the Working Group 3 AR6 report, they have been implemented on all summary for policymaker figures. They have also been implemented on the technical summary figures and some of the input data sets for these figures. You can find all archived data for the AR6 assessment in the AR6 data catalog, which I provide the link for here. As for Working Group 3, SPM and technical summary data and figures, they can be found available in the Metadata Works Data Distribution Center catalog, which I provide the link for here as well. And for each of these figures, we do not only provide the data, but also the metadata, the abstract and citation, as well as information on the derivation of the underlying data and the recommended figure citation. And as I mentioned earlier, we worked closely with our colleagues in the DDC on the providing data for the Zenodo AR6 community. In terms of licensing, IPCC post-processed data and figure data are distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution license, as long as this does not infringe the interest of relevant license holders. We made this recommendation in order to facilitate the reuse of the data both in research by practitioners, the media, and users more broadly. In terms of copyrights, the IPCC assessment product, be it text, logos, maps, or electronic downloads, is a property of the IPCC, are protected by intellectual property laws. You may download, copy material for personal and non-commercial use. A limited number of the figures or short excerpt of the report can be reproduced for books, for instance, and there is no charge for this use as long as the original source is properly acknowledged with full citation, be it the chapter or the SPM, and full legend. Any queries regarding reproducing IPCC material can be submitted to the IPCC Secretariat. So to summarize, the AR6 established TG data in order to strengthen the collaboration between the DDC and the TSU on the implementation of the FAIR data principle for the first time in the IPCC. Now that we are in the last few months of the AR6 assessment cycle, DG Data will be debriefing on the experience in the AR6 with the DDC, TSU, as well as authors to provide recommendation for future cycle. And this is a key step for the implementation of the FAIR principles immediately at the start of the next assessment cycle with a strong collaboration across all parties, as well as establishing a direct link between contacts in the TSU, DDC, and DG Data from the start. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adam Millward from Metadata Works, and welcome to my talk on the IPCC Data Distribution Centre. So to support the most important decisions of our generation, governments, journalists and citizen groups all need access to credible, relevant data on the causes, impacts and effective mitigation strategies for climate change. An enormous amount of data is generated for climate change research, and it's an incredibly valuable asset. So distributing and preserving that data ensures the full value of the data is maximised, and that's what the DDC is all about. In terms of our history, well, we know that trust, openness and transparency are fundamental tenets of the IPCC activities. So the DDC was established in 1997 to ensure the provenance and traceability of all of that data and to ensure it would be high quality and accessible to researchers across the world. They've also been established to support the provision of data and to provide tools and guidance for all the IPCC authors, editors and coordinators during each assessment cycle. In terms of our principles, we sign up to the FAIR data principles, so it's all about findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable data, and I'd encourage you to come and read some of the documentation we've got around that. We also sign up to the trust principles around data preservation within data environments. We sign up to DataCite's principles around digital object identifiers and archival. So what does that look like in the real world? Well, it's all about traceability, credit and preservation. So if we're looking at one of the assessment reports at the moment, let's say the summary for policymakers for Working Group 3, there'll be a number of different graphics. And let's say that figure SPM4, which is all about global GHG emissions, was interesting and we wanted to dive into a little bit more detail. We can then transfer over to the IPCC data catalogue and we can go and explore the data itself that supports those final figures. So there's 4 different panels, there's 4 different data sets. We can go and download them, explore them and understand the context of that data. That final figure data is an analysis of other data, other source data. And so that final figure data references those different sources. So the catalogue also then provides the traceability and credit for those different sources, such as the IASA data or the Copernicus data as well. And all of this ensures that the data is preserved effectively so that it conforms to the principles of fairness, findable, accessibility, interoperability and reusability. In addition to providing the data catalogue and all of those preservation services, the DDC offers a support desk for the public so they can come and ask questions, and there's an interface to the DDC team, and they can also interface with authors and editors and coordinators through that platform. We've got a really good customer satisfaction rating through that capability. We also provide a metadata onboarding platform within the data catalogue. So this is a secure area where coordinators can come in and tell us about all of the data that's coming through the assessment reports. And we've got a metadata profile that describes exactly the type of information we would like to capture when we're preserving, we're archiving data to make it more findable through the data catalogue. If you're interested in that, I've put some links in the resources slide at the end of this presentation. In terms of the opportunities going forward, well, we think there's an opportunity to support increased data access and usage through the platform and through the services we offer. We want to fill in the gaps in some of the IPCC data archival processes. We think we can improve the quality and efficiency of data management for the whole IPCC and provide leadership and best practice, such as the metadata profile that we've published on GitHub. We're also looking to enhance some of the catalogue features. So we're going to be creating collections to bring all of the different data sets together. We want to create a bit more of a dynamic user interface where we can preview some of the content and also create a space where events can be published. So if someone's created a webinar like this to talk about the data, that can be displayed alongside the data itself and be available to different type of consumers. We're also looking to enhance the service, so increase the coverage of input and intermediate data sets during the next assessment cycle. We're looking to develop some user-friendly visual overviews that describes the relationship between data sets and organizations across the IPCC. And also we're going to look at establishing federation that will allow different data repositories to talk to one another and start to share the metadata to improve visibility and accessibility of the data across the IPCC. So in terms of the resources, I'd encourage you to come and look at IPCC data and search for data sets. We've got some schemas on GitHub if you're interested in metadata profiles, and also if you'd like to learn more about us, please follow the links below. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. So do we go to Ed now, to you for 2 sessions by you?
Sure, that's right. Afternoon, everyone. And thanks Jayashri, Ala, and Shreya for the great introductions. So first, I'm going to show a very quick video that gives an introduction to the Scenarios database, and then we'll move into the demonstration that I'll take you through live. So this is just 3 minutes long.
Hi, I'm Edward Byers, and this is a video pill about the AR6 Scenario Explorer and Database hosted by YASA. In April 2022, the Working Group 3 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was approved and released. The Working Group 3 report maps out the options and pathways for mitigating climate change, concluding that nothing short of full societal transformation is needed, starting immediately, to have a chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees. We saw statements like these in the headlines, numbers about emissions reductions by 2030 and fossil fuel phase out. Many of these numbers from the report come from the AR6 Scenarios Database. For over 3 years, more than 3,000 quantitative scenarios were uploaded by the energy and climate change research communities from around the world, many of which members of the Integrated Assessment Modeling Consortium. Analysis in the latest IPCC report is supported by this data, which contains short and long-term projections on CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions, global temperature levels, the energy sector, socioeconomic development, industry, buildings, transport, and land use. This has been the largest and most inclusive scenario collection process in Working Group 3 to date. To access AR6 Scenario Explorer and Database, simply search AR6 Scenario Explorer or visit data.ece.yasa.ac.at/AR6. Access the database as a guest. Otherwise, register for an account or sign in to be able to save your analysis of workspaces within the Scenario Explorer. You can load existing workspaces, such as these ones made for illustrative mitigation pathways, or create your own, customizing your panels to show different variables and scenarios. You can download the data for your own analysis and check out the Python package designed specifically for this type of dataset and analysis. Want to compare scenarios that limit warming to 1.5 and 2 degrees? The database filters make this possible to easily change the scenarios, variables, and regions that are displayed. There are also options to change visualization settings, export images, download the data. Documentation can be viewed directly in the panel or on the documentation page. On the downloads page, you can download full snapshots of the database as CSV files for analysis, split by different regional aggregations, such as global data and by country. Downloads also include metadata indicators, which adds additional information about each scenario in the database. For tutorials on how to use Scenario Explorer in more advanced ways, information about database and process, citation, licensing, and acknowledgements, see the About page, or get in touch with us. This community effort has supported analysis of Working Group 3 assessment, and will continue to support research on mitigation of climate change for years to come. If you're using Database for your own research and need help, have questions or feedback, we would love to hear from you.
Okay. So go back to sharing the screen, and it's me again. So that's the quick teaser video. Now I'll take you through the database live, and thanks again for joining. This is the fourth or fifth event that we've done, and excited to do this one for Asia specifically. So starting off, this is the registration screen, and during this session we'll demonstrate a number of features. You can put questions in the question and answer section, and about halfway through the demo I'll have a look and perhaps answer some of them live. That might be easier. But with using examples of Asia, we're going to look at the registration, the workspaces page, look at existing workspaces, how to customize data panels and features, configuration of scenarios and different variables, and then a little bit on the documentation and creating new workspaces. So you can log in. This is the landing page that if you're not logged in, that you'll get to at data.ece.yaza.ac.at. You can log in as a guest just by clicking here, guest login, but I would recommend doing registration if you haven't already. This would give you access to multiple scenario explorers through one account, such as the 1.5 degrees database, NGFS, which are the scenarios used by central banks and the finance sector, as well as AR6. If you do create an account, you'll be able to save your workspaces for later, and when we go through the demo, you'll understand what I mean by that. And you'll also have access to more downloads, which is not always available for the guest users. The registration is very simple. It is just name, email address, and password, and then you get a confirmation to your email. So if we log in here, we get to what we call the workspaces page. And this workspaces page has a number of tiles on it. And you'll see the ones that are publicly available, as well as ones that you've created for yourself. Workspace is like a customizable dashboard that's developed by a user, and it comprises different panels, and each panel shows a chart of data. And so users can develop multiple workspaces. You can save the configuration, you can clone it, you can export the data, and you can share a workspace with others. We can see here, for example, workspaces that we made both after the Working Group 3 report came out about the illustrative mitigation pathways. So this one focusing on final energy, another one focusing on greenhouse gas and climate outcomes of the illustrative mitigation pathways, as well as some of the examples that we've been doing for these TG data outreach events that look more specifically into regions. And we've made some new ones here specifically related to Asia. The illustrative mitigation pathways, as described previously by Jayashri, are high quality scenarios that show, for example, one scenario with low demands, or another with high efficiency, or another with high renewables, and so forth. And in these workspaces, they are shown with data that is presented at the global level, but there is also data at the regional level. For the workspaces that I made for this session, I'm going to take you through two examples that have been developed specifically with Asia data. And this first one is called Asia 1.5C Pathways, C1. Now, the C1 refers to the climate categorization. These are the most ambitious pathways. The pathways shown here come from global integrated assessment models. In terms of benefits, they're kind of globally consistent in terms of the regions and the data they do. They're cost optimal, they're quite macroeconomic, and they cover all of the emissions in both land and energy sectors and interactions with climate. But in terms of limitations, they can lack detail compared to specifically national and regional models and also sectoral models. And what we're showing here is a multi-model scenario comparison. These are scenarios that were used in Chapter 3 on the long-term mitigation pathways. And this is useful for understanding range of possible outcomes of scenarios that limit warming specifically to 1.5 degrees C. So this is the most ambitious category. And this is really the solution space that we want to be looking at. The models don't agree on all aspects. You can see wide ranges. This is not necessarily a bad thing, as diversity of outcomes also leads to some useful insights. So here we can see a number of panels showing, for example, CO2 emissions from energy industrial processes, methane from the AFOLU sector, carbon sequestration projections, and also the secondary energy, the electricity supply, final energy, and also the CO2 emissions of electricity supply. So for example, in these ambitious mitigation pathways, we can see that pretty much all of the pathways in Asia are indicating close to a net zero electricity sector by mid-century, and some of them much sooner than that, in the 2040s or 2030s. And all of those pathways being very close to zero, if not substantially net negative electricity sector, likely due to bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. In terms of carbon sequestration, we can see a very wide range. So some scenarios do not project much carbon sequestration, either because it's too expensive, or they deliberately try to avoid it, or they think it's not going to happen. Others say or allow the models to follow these pathways, and we can see some models projecting up to 6, 8, 10 gigatons per year of carbon sequestration by the late century in these ambitious mitigation pathways. We also see in terms of the main energy and industrial processes emissions, so these are moving rapidly towards net zero by the 2050s or a bit longer. But there are, this would also be balanced by land use emissions, for example. One important thing to note is that many of the models here report different levels of data, and so some of them report different regions and some of them report different countries. This can make it a little bit difficult to compare. Another of these reasons is that, so within the database we have about 3,000 scenarios, and they come from different types of models, so global, multi-regional, sectoral, and also national models. It's the first time we've tried to bring them all into one consolidated database for the purposes of the IPCC. As many of the scenarios are from integrated assessment models, we also actually had about 100 new models that had never participated in IPCC scenario process before, which is a substantial increase based on past assessments. So let's go through now exploring some of these panels in more detail and understand what is also being shown and how to customize them. So here we're showing these emissions. This is for the total Asian region, so actually all Asian countries except Japan. We see the variable name here. We see a title up here. We can see that there are 97 scenarios in this selection, 1 variable and 1 region. In order to change the region, we can click on region and we get the options here. And there's many different regional aggregations. And so one is the 6-region aggregation used within the IPCC. Another is a 10 global continent region. So they would allow you to separate, for example, countries of South Asia compared to different countries of centrally planned Asia, primarily China, or perhaps other countries of Asia. So we could change this now to, let's say, South Asia, and we'll just deselect this one. And once you select the new region, you click apply, and the data will change. You can also select multiple regions at the same time. This doesn't necessarily make sense in this case. And you can also do a text search. So you could change this, let's say, for Europe, and then you would see the different options. And so we could select, let's say, this one here. We see exactly the same models and the same scenarios, but the data for a different region. We can also change the variable. And so maybe we just go back to Asia, but we decide that instead of energy, CO2, industrial process emissions, maybe we want to look at something like carbon prices. And so we can do a text search here, and we find the carbon price variable, click apply, and the data will update. Clicking on this drop-down menu, you can see the structure of the variables. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of possibilities, and they're kind of grouped into different categories. And then you'll see that they have a structured tree. So if we look at, for example, emissions, then we see this is broken down by the different types of gases. Depending on the gas, then we see that we can break this down to CO2 and CO2 emissions for the energy sector or energy supply, electricity. So that would give us emissions from CO2 from the electricity supply sector. And so in some variables, there's a very high level of detail that you can explore. We have added some somewhat filters here. So if you're interested specifically in socioeconomics, then it will only show socioeconomic variables. That makes it a bit easier to explore a grouping for the energy, also for the emissions, and also climate related ones. And one of the useful features is also, let's say we select GDP, but we select show only available variables from the scenario selection. And this will reduce the amount of information that's showed to us so that only options that are available in the database get shown to us. There is also, just going back to the region, this country level data, and we'll explore that more in the next dashboard. But in theory, the database can hold data from any country in the world. But we do not actually have data from every country in the world because we didn't receive it necessarily. But that is one way to search for that. In terms of visualization, we can click here for the panel options. We can change the name that's shown up here, add a description. And we can also change the range that's shown for the years. So it was limited to 2050, but we can extend that to 2100. Take a moment, and now we can see that our chart has expanded to 2100. Along the top here, hidden behind the title, are some other visualization options. So we can turn the legend on and off, and you can highlight different pathways. We can turn this into a bar chart. It doesn't necessarily make sense in this case, but might take a while now. It doesn't necessarily make sense to show this data as a bar chart. Ooh. I've made a mistake and I've selected all regions. This might take a while to process.
So in between, you can take up the question that's in the question answers box, which says that can we download country level scenario and macroeconomic data after registration, country like Bangladesh?
Yeah. Any data that you can see and access and visualize here that can be downloaded. I was just about to show how that can be done, but I might have to reload this page because I accidentally clicked all the regions and now it's asking for a lot of data. So we'll just wait for that to load. Here we go. So we do not want. Let's just select, go back to Asia. Okay, so we can change this one to a bar chart. It doesn't make sense in this case, but some of your data selections will make sense or make more sense as a bar chart. Another useful thing is to view the data as a table, and here we can explore more easily which of the models and the scenarios that are here and look at it as a data table. And then this button here is the option to download, and we can download the data that's shown specifically within this panel as a CSV or an Excel file. You can also save when it's shown as a line chart or a bar chart, you can save the image of the chart. And then lastly, there's this option for panel documentation. And so this allows us to get a little bit more information about what's shown in the chart. So we can see that there's the models and the scenarios. And if we click on a model, such as AIM-CGE 2.2, then we get a very brief description of the objective of the model and a link, hopefully, to the documentation. We don't have information for all the models, but we did ask all of them to submit it. And so there's a varied level of coverage in terms of the information about the models and the scenarios. And so also for the scenarios, most of them will have a link at least to the paper or literature reference for this scenario. And so someone asked what was the kind of, how did we decide which scenarios could be in the database? Anyone could submit data scenarios to the database, but they need to be from a peer-reviewed, or they need to be backed up by a peer-reviewed published literature source. And so this was checked also by the authors and considered whether they would be used in the assessment. And so for all the scenarios, we've put the corresponding link to the literature. You can also see a description of the variable. So there isn't one in this case, but other variables do have some descriptions. And that's access to the same documentation here, but it's a quick preview, and we can also search. So if we're interested in searching the thing, but if we're interested in a different model, then we can see if it's available. Okay, let me just see if there's. Yeah, one last thing to show, just 1 second for these to load, is can take a bit of time to configure these panels. And one quick way is that once you configure the scenarios and variables and regions that you want, is to use this option that's called clone panel. When you clone panel, I mean, it'll take a few seconds, but I've done it before. So this is a cloned version. Then you get exactly the same configuration. And then here I would say, well, I want all the same configuration, but I just want to show a different variable. So I want to show population. And I'll select that one. And then we've got exactly the same configuration, but for a different variable. Now, very important when you do lots of work on this is to then save the workspace. And so this is at the top right, because it can take time to develop and you want to be able to revisit the workspace or clone it. And so this is at the top right. If you exit the browser, I'm afraid you will likely lose it. Okay, now I think we move on to the second workspace, but I'll just see if there's any if anyone else wants to ask any other questions, but specifically about the data download. So I can just elaborate on that question that we had, was that on the downloads page, I'll explain in a bit that there are options to download large portions of the database, but this is quite heavy files and maybe you don't want all of it. And so one way to extract bit more with tweezer precision, just specific variables or scenarios that you want from the database, is to configure a workspace and a panel with just the data that you want to download. And then, so maybe you just want the Asia region data, and so you would configure a panel with just the specific Asian region data that you want, and then you click download and would download that data directly. As for specifically Bangladesh, I'm not sure. I don't think we had any specific national level models that were representing Bangladesh, and I'm not sure if the global ones had it as a specific region, I'm afraid, but we can have a look. So a question now I see also in the Q&A, dollar numbers on the y-axis for, I presume they mean about this GDP one. Is there inflation adjustment of the money involved in mitigation measures? Not sure I fully understand. I mean, as I understand it, these are fixed to 2010 dollars. So I think the answer there is no. Okay, I'll move on to the next workspace. The other workspace that we've made here is called Asia, and at the top of it we've got, I've done a query of the database, but I'm here displaying it in the table section, all of the national models for Asia. And so these are models that are just at the country level. And then all of the models that have more like a global scope, but represent some specific Asian countries as standalone countries. And these are, some of the data is, I mean, they're reporting it in the same way, but these come from two slightly different types of models, and depending on your interest and focus may be relevant to different groups of people. And so in terms of national models for Asia, we can actually look here in the documentation and we can see that these are all national. A lot of them are from AIM. So the AIM CGE model that is used in a number of countries now for Japan, Korea, India, China, India, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Then we've got a few other Markov versions, a few different models for China specifically, also additionally for Japan, the Times China version. And so these are 24 models that are specific national level models. They'll be quite detailed in how they've been done. And in terms of the countries that are covered, South Korea, China, India, Indonesia, Japan, Thailand, and Vietnam. Basically, you can, these national models have tend to have the country in the name here. So I built a workspace just for one of the variables, just so that we could see the list and see how many scenarios there are. So approximately 430 scenarios from the set of national models. But if we were interested in a different variable, then then we could select it here, as I've already shown. So I put here this here just for reference for people. In terms of global models, so these are the global integrated assessment models. And some of these represent some of the large Asian countries as individual regions because they're so significant in terms of energy and emissions. So in particular, China, India, South Korea, it depends on the model, Japan, Pakistan, Indonesia, India. We could look in the documentation again. And so we have many more scenarios because there are many global integrated assessment models covering a number of these regions. So these are, so not all of these are shown. This is based on my query. And a large number of scenarios also. But what we know is that, for example, if we take even this ICES XPS model, it's a global macroeconomic model. I think it has a large number of different countries individually represented. So we see Japan, Indonesia, India, China, and South Korea for different scenarios. We know that if we look at scenarios from this model and from this scenario for different countries, they've been constructed in the same consistent global macroeconomic context. So for this baseline scenario, it means that there's no constraints on emissions. It's a business as usual scenario. But if it was a similar scenario that was a 1.5 degree scenario, we could look at the results from different countries and compare them for the same scenario, and that would be also useful information. And so I've put this here also for reference, just so we can see the extent of different models that are reporting information for major Asian countries in particular. I've also developed some panels here. This is more of a multi-model comparison just for some different countries. So in this case, we did Japan first. We've got the energy sector CO2 emissions and also final energy projections. We can see obviously a slight disagreement amongst the models in terms of a range in what's shown. And there's also a wide range of scenarios, a similar thing for the models that are for China. So we've got a number of Chinese models. These are the national models that are here. Electricity sector emissions. And then also did it quickly also for Thailand and India. So I just cloned these panels, changed the country, and then we changed the scenarios. So this is the last thing that I'll show. And this is how to configure a new panel and to build your own scenario selection. So I will just click here and click add a time series panel. This will take a second. We'll get a new panel that's built here. And there's a few different ways to do this. So one option is, this will appear now, it's the category and indicators selection, and the other one is to select from the list. If you know which models and scenarios you want to explore, then you can use this selection from the list, and you can also search. If you're not sure, then the category indicator selection might be more helpful. Just going to, oops. So back to the scenario selection. One of the first questions that you may have is if you're interested in global or national sectoral models. So currently they're all selected, but we can reduce them. I'm going to use global as an example here now. So I just deselect these options. and that's already reduced the amount of space or amount of scenarios that are available. And this is the regional scope. We can also then add other categories. And so there's a number of filters here. This is our metadata filter. So if you remember in Jayashree's presentation, we had the climate categorization, and this was the different ambition levels of the global climate scenarios that some scenarios are categorized for. If you're interested in scenarios that are appearing, for example, in the Working Group 3 summary for policymakers, we have a specific set of 1,202 scenarios. And so we can collect this category name to filter just specifically these scenarios. Takes a moment. And so we'll have all of these ones, C1 to C8, but we'll take out these last two here. And these are the scenarios. Let me see, hopefully this works. And these will be the scenarios that are featured there. We can also change other categories. So we can have numerical categories. You may want to search for scenarios that reduce emissions by a certain amount between 2019 to 2050. This again applies only specifically to the global scenarios for which it's been calculated, but there are some options specifically for the global scenarios to filter with these categories. And once you've done these selections here, you click on select from list and you click apply category and indicator selection, and it will select from this very long list just the relevant scenarios, and then we click apply here. I don't recommend almost ever clicking the add all scenarios because there's a very large number of scenarios in this database, and the query may block the database for some while. If we know which, just going to reset the filters. If we know which models and scenarios that we want, another way to search, and this is particularly perhaps more relevant, and this is how I did it for the national models. All the national models have the name. So if we're interested, for example, in Thailand, then I can search here in the model name Thailand, and these are the two models that are available. And then we see the list of scenarios that are available for this AIM Hub Thailand. And then I will select all, click apply, and now we've got 33 scenarios that are available. And then we say, maybe I also want to add the India ones for comparison, and I'll just select this AIM Hub India, click apply, select a few, adds them, and now we've got 36 scenarios. So you can go building and adding with this scenario selection. And then we'll go through the region data selection range as previously. For the regions, obviously we need to select the relevant regions. So I'll go Thailand and India. And there, and then we'll just select, not that one. This one, and then we have the data as appeared. So that's taking you from the beginning and showing the scenario selection. Very lastly, I'm almost finished. We'll just move on to creating a new workspace page. And so landing on the workspaces page again, we've kind of building up, will be a way to do create a new workspace. I suggest you edit the workspace here. It's very simple. You can provide a name, also a description. You can keep it private, or you can choose it unlisted. And if you choose it as unlisted and press the key button, you'll get a unique URL code that you can share with another user, and they'll be able to view the workspace, but it won't be findable to the public, or it won't show up to other people. And then when you're ready, you need to click this cloud button and make sure that you save it to upload it to the server. Lastly, onto the documentation and the downloads pages. So this is the full view of the documentation that I had shown previously. And so we can see for different models, the objective and the documentation to that model, regional coverage. Similarly for the scenarios, you can click on a scenario. Not all of them have full information, but I think, for example, here, commit scenario, then it takes you to a link to where those scenarios are described and published, and also the project that it's from. Within the documentation is also the metadata categories. So when I described those different filters that we can apply in selecting scenarios, this is available here. And some of these have descriptions, not all, on what those categories are showing. And so category name is the climate outcome from the climate assessment. See chapter 3 for details. Lastly, on the downloads, so there's information about citation and the release notes and fixes that were made after the first version was published. And down at the bottom, you see the list of the different files. The data is too large to put into one file. It's not, wouldn't be very easy for people to work with it in one file. So here at the bottom, you can see the 1.0 versions and then the 1.1 versions. And we've split the data by regions. So we have a world file, we have these regional aggregations, R5, R6, R10. And then if you're interested in specifically country level data, we have this ISO 3 file. This metadata indicators file also has lots of interesting information about the scenarios and data that's been calculated. But this is where the downloads can be found. Finally, on the About page, describes a lot about the scenarios process and where it was used in the report. And I would encourage you specifically to check out Annex 3 of the report that has loads of information about the scenarios and the database. We also have tutorial videos, information about the data releases, mitigation pathways, release notes, and then lastly, acknowledgements. I think important to say that none of this has been possible without many contributions from many people, lead authors across many chapters, but also people working here at YASA and within the TSU, funding from European Commission that supports some of the stuff that goes on here at YASA related to the databases, and lots of support, yes, just specifically from the TSU and Working Group 3 and the Working Group 3 co-chairs. This has been the work of many years by lots of people in service of IPCC, and also building upon lots of hard work from energy and climate modeling teams around the world that have submitted their scenarios to this database. So really important to encourage people to continue to do this. I hope we'll see even more submissions in the next assessment. And I think we've increased the participation and diversity of model teams, and I hope this will continue to grow and more transparently support the findings of the IPCC assessment. But now it's over to you, researchers and policymakers and analysts. I hope you find this a useful resource into your day-to-day work on accelerating action on climate change. I know that some of what I presented is complicated, and working with the data can be frustrating sometimes, but if you have difficulties or if you're doing interesting things, then get in touch with us. And so I hope that was helpful, and thanks for listening, and happy to take the last few questions. Let's see. We have question about question 4, or not sure I understand, but yeah, the scenarios database should be covering and relevant for a number of chapters. So in particular, chapters 3, 4, 9, and 10 worked quite closely with them, but also I think was used a little bit in chapter 5, also the finance chapter. Yeah, anyone else with questions, please put them in the Q&A. I have a question about assumptions mentioned in the website for the different scenarios. Not really. I would recommend to go specifically to the papers for those scenarios. So if you go onto the documentation page or in the documentation panel and select that scenario, then that would take you to the published literature where those scenarios would be described. But it's difficult to get all the information. I mean, we try to collect lots of meta information from the model teams, and some put a lot of effort into providing information, but it's also more challenging for others. But we haven't been able to document this for all models and scenarios. There's also so many different types of models that then you ask one question about what's the emissions objective or emissions constraint, and this isn't relevant for other models and scenarios. So we haven't been able to go into that detail. Yeah, I don't see more questions. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm
presented
just trying
a lot.
to give. Yeah, I'm just trying to get 1 or 2 minutes to people if they want to come back with any question. Otherwise, we will close the session. Actually, yeah. I don't see any questions. So, but okay, yeah. So you have a question, Ed?
Do we have scenarios of sea level rise from these models? No, unfortunately not. I think this is an important connection to working group 1 and 2, but yeah, maybe one day. I mean, this is the circle of models that we have in IPCC. These are often producing the emissions that go into the climate models, and the climate models will then give us the idea of or impact model into the sea level rise. But yeah, not in these cases. I would recommend also to look at the Working Group 1 IPCC Atlas Explorer. That is a very nice interactive interface for exploring on the global map a range of climate data options. I'm not sure if they have specifically sea level rise projections there, but they would probably also point you in the right direction for that. And yeah, just one question now from Sheikh Islam. Is there hands-on training events to learn more effectively? So to be quite honest, we had thought about doing this, or the intention was to do this originally, a more focused session with breakout groups and small breakout groups. And two difficulties in this. One is that there was a very large amount of interest, and so it would have been difficult to do so many small breakout groups. And also, honestly, also then we have many people working on the database at the same time can be, then we get some performance issues, which makes it difficult to do the hands-on training with multiple people at the same time. So I'm afraid not. I would recommend to see the tutorial videos that we have. There's a small link, yeah, on the About page. Just here, Scenario Explorer tutorial videos. And then you can also email myself if we have questions, for example. But I think we'll take the suggestion back also to see if there's another way we can do live trainings with people. And Ala has shared the link to the Working Group 1 Atlas in the chat that I just mentioned.
Okay, there is silence for quite some time, so I don't think there is any more question coming from the audience. So I'd like to thank all the speakers. Although Jim is not here, still Jim, Shreya, David, Adam, Ala, Sebastian, Edward, for joining us today in this webinar for the Asian region, despite all odd hours for some of you. And also I thank all the participants in this webinar and to look forward to many scientific outputs from the science community from this region to generate scenarios appropriate for your country or the region or the sector, and even for the global scale, and submit it to the IPCC scenario call. I thank Asian Institute of Technology for hosting this event, and also at Smart Center in AIT, we are currently developing low demand scenarios and national scale sector models using open source modeling tools, using national level detailed data sets. We are working with various institutions and researchers as a community in the region on India's zero carbon pathways and developing various scenarios. Similarly, trying to do for Bangladesh, Thailand, and Pakistan, and mapping sector-specific transition challenges. So with sincere thanks, we end the webinar today, and maybe we cross paths again. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Jayashri. Bye.
Yeah, I just see one small question.
Ooh. The last one. Recommend open source modeling tools to develop low demand scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say that you can use open source tools for generating any kind of modeling scenario. Any kind of, you can develop any kind of model and then modeling scenarios. It just depends how you include the low demand scenario specifications in your model. Okay, thank you very much. And we stop here now. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.